Firstly, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Mathew. I'm going to be talking all things social media today. Now, I still have to explain what I do to my mum and dad on a regular basis. My mum's very much like, so what do you do? How are you paid? Do you advertise stuff on your Instagram, on your TikTok? So I'm hoping today I can give everybody a little bit of knowledge and a bit better of understanding as to the power of social media and the connection that it can bring. So yeah, my name's Mathew. I'm a presenter, a content creator, and I've been fortunate enough through Instagram over the past few years to work with a host of different brands from Sky, Fiverr, BT Sport, and the whole world of presenting, a lot of it is changing now because everybody's so addicted to their phones that everybody's viewing content and everybody's got their iPhones, they're constantly on them. So this has really been a huge implication of what brands are starting to do through social media. I run a content creation agency called Gingernuts Creative, which creates digital content for brands and for brands and organizations, social media channels. The agency was set up because the demand for content is so high and much needed at the moment. And we really pride ourselves on creating engaging, viral content. And our kind of USP is that we can turn it around really, really quick. Because if it's not in somebody's inbox yesterday, then you're going to get in trouble for it. So I do have our show reel here. I'm just going to see if this works okay. It should do. Oh, there we go. I mean, there is a bit of sound with it, but... Oh, there we go. And yeah, so that's the show reel for the company that we set up a year ago. In that time, we've had great opportunities to work with engaging brands. There's been a plethora of opportunities through it. So I'm also, this is why I'm so excited today to come and talk to you really. Like a huge part of my life is working with Diabetes UK and JDRF. So I'm a type 1 diabetic. And I guess one of the key takeaways I want to try and give to you today is that if you are struggling with social media, one of the best things that you can do is start reaching out to ambassadors. Now, I'm not saying as a charity you can go out there and get maybe future James Bond, James Norton, probably not going to happen, or maybe an international rugby player. But there's a whole host of people out there who are willing to give, and this is what's really, really important, give you exposure for free. So you don't have to go out there and pay for it. You've got Instagrammers, influencers, ambassadors who want to go out there and give you content. Because I love working with the brands and everything that I do. But for me, the most valuable and the most rewarding work that I do is through Diabetes UK. I've been able to run marathons for them, and I can go to them and pitch ideas. And it gives them exposure to content, which is just invaluable. Because the amount of time that people are spending on their phones these days, it's hard, even in a conversation with family and friends, to get people off their phones because they're looking at something so much. So one real strong takeaway that I would say from today is if you are struggling to build your social media presence, start looking out there, see what people are doing. Like I ran a few weeks ago, there's a chap called Josh Patterson, don't know if anybody knows him, he's currently running 76 marathons in 76 days in every city in the UK. I know, he's a lunatic. And I joined him in North Wales in Bangor for it, and he's doing it for Samaritans. And the exposure that they've got because of it has been absolutely huge. And Josh loves it. He finds it really, really rewarding. So, yeah, just to bang that home a bit, I know I keep repeating it, but finding an ambassador or a group of people that want to represent your charity can just do wonders for your social media exposure, and it's free. So, yeah, this is a social media collaboration that I did with a brand called Fiverr, called Peter Pancreas. Now, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 13 years old. My mum knew what to look out for at the time. So a brand came to me and said, look, what would you like to do? So I collaborated with Diabetes UK and JDRF, and we put this ebook together. So when the ebook went live, JDRF and Diabetes UK, they threw it out to their database of emails, and we got a really, really good response with it. So if you can be savvy with ambassadors that you're working with, potential brand collaborations, it can be, a fantastic potential for exposure. And if anybody does want this, by the way, I'm not just saying it because I wrote it, but it's a great read, so let me know. And yeah, this goes back to, essentially, video marketing is the most powerful marketing tool that we've ever had. It's there in our hand, we can touch it, we can feel it. There are over 100 billion views on TikTok every single month. YouTube Shorts is now YouTube is the second biggest search engine behind Google. So finding a way to put out content regularly is so, so important, but sometimes it can feel like a full-time job. Can I, a show of hands to anybody who says, finds Instagram and YouTube really confusing and social media in general? Yeah, okay. So there's a few things that I'd love to just to give you, just to take away. So first and foremost, finding those ambassadors, because it creates exposure for you and it's free. And secondly, if you are going to start putting content out there, all the content that you've already got or need is probably already in your camera roll. So if you're looking after a charity and you've just been to the London Marathon, there's going to be 5-10-second clips in there. If you've done a cake sale, if you've done a bake sale, something like that, start putting the content out there. In terms of platforms, you can use the same piece of content for every single platform. Just think about your demographic and who you're talking to. So if you've got a 10-second clip from a London Marathon, you can put that across LinkedIn, you can put it across Instagram, you can put it across TikTok, and just think about the copy that you're using for it. Again, if anybody wants to reach out to me after this, I will leave my email address, because sometimes I know the whole world of social media can feel overwhelming, and it's like, where do I start? But what's the old Chinese proverb? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And it's exactly the same with social media, because what's happening in the advertising world is the likes of like Starbucks, Coca-Cola, all the money's being pulled from these companies and towards content creators. And that's why it's such an important and exciting time to start putting content out there as a charity. So yeah, happy shooting. So again, just to go through those points, reach out to brand ambassadors. That's really, really important, because they love making content for you. The content that you need is probably already on your camera roll. Just start getting it out there. You don't need to people think that you've got to put 1, 2, 3 minute pieces of content out there. The way that these Instagram and TikTok algorithms work is that you can put a 5-second piece or a 10-second piece of content out there, and you can get like 12 million views. I did a video a few weeks ago of my daughter putting on my Freestyle Libre, my sensor, just on the front camera, popped up against the fridge, and it got 13 million views. Like, imagine what that could do for your charity. I mean, my daughter is a little superstar, so fair play to her. But so yeah, if there's anything at all that I can help with, I hope that's been useful. Anything at all that I can help with, please feel free to reach out to me at this email address, and I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, do that at the end.
Yeah, we're going to just go into a presentation from Luke, who I think is going to kind of unpack something that is tricky for us all to figure out, which is the world of Gen Z. And then we'll kind of open up the floor to any questions.
What's up, everyone? How's everyone doing? Sweet. All right, so I run a youth and culture marketing agency called Unorthodox Creative. We help some of the biggest brands in the world, Nike, Adidas, Levi's, Budweiser. We work directly into their CMOs, CEOs, helping ensure their brand is set up for future success. And that can be looking at their consumer insight, brand strategy, positioning, consumer segmentation. And we have a lot of insight in terms of what the next generation of volunteers are going to be centered around, what their ideology is, what their mindset is. So I've taken a snapshot of some recent trends that we've surfaced through our research platform, and then some key principles around culture marketing, which is what I think you guys need to hear to help ensure that you guys are set up like these big brands for success. So we do a lot of insight, strategy, and creative. Everything we do is powered by our proprietary research platform, which is Frontline, which specializes on providing cultural intelligence and consumer nuance and insight to help brands stay ahead. We test product, we test comms, we test messaging, ambassadors, anything that a brand needs to roll out, they'll generally use us to test to see if it's going to be a success or failure. What makes us number one at what we do, like we truly are the best at what we do across the globe. And it's quite niche, but it's definitely, we're the best at what we do. And why? Our youth expertise is industry leading. We then combine big data and then cultural intelligence. So what I'm going to do is just talk a bit about some of these macro trends that we're seeing that you guys need to be aware of to help ensure your business or your organization, your charity is primed for success. And the first macro topic is this idea of cultural currency. Cultural equity is the new cachet for young people. That's how they are identifying, that's how they're prioritizing the brands, the organizations that they're in contact with. So you have to have this in mind when you're thinking about your comms strategy. And I brought out some key insights that will underpin that statement. The first is that young people are increasingly seeking cultural communities that reflect their niche cultural interests. The idea of mainstream, high street archetypes no longer exists. It's way more culturally nuanced. Young people are looking at different cultural references that they center their identity around. Gen Z are getting back in touch with their ancestral roots and cultural heritage rather than trying to assimilate with sort of contemporary Western culture. They're getting back into their cultural roots and looking at how they then can bring that up to make a big part of their identity. Pop culture is moving away from Eurocentric perspective, and I think you need to think about that in your comms. And a desire for cultural exploration, local versus global, modernity versus tradition, and then ancestral versus contemporary culture. And often young people are fusing those different references to create a new hybrid identity and personality or persona, which is really important in terms of how you're positioning your campaigns. And I think the thing to take out of that insight is how do you empower the communities and cultural movements behind the trends rather than focus on specific personas? Soft life is another macro trend, right? And this idea of the pursuit of pause basically means that young people are opting out of high pressure, socially programmed productivity goals, and this kind of hustle mentality, this entrepreneurial spirit, which definitely exists within Gen Z, that there is a balance to that. And all of this insight has been curated around a more progressive consumer. This doesn't represent everyone, but this is who I believe has the highest propensity to want to volunteer. So, a key insight is self-care over productivity. Bare minimum Mondays is a trending hashtag that best speaks to that point. Challenging systematic structural expectations on young people is what this generation is about. Stepping away from traditional goals. Owning a house. The idea of owning a house is kind of foreign and feels well out of reach. Owning cars. They're just out, there's a proportion that are just opting out. It is about a more fulfilling life. And that was perpetuated, and that ideology was crystallized as a result of COVID. So how do you encourage wellness and health over productivity in your comms? I appreciate you guys are charity, so look at the similarities, look at the bits that you can identify and pull that into your brand strategy. Decentralized multi-hyphenate identities, again, is another macro trend. Youth identities are constantly in flux. We know this, but the level and the multiplicity of it, I think, is underestimated. They're continuously reimagined, no longer tethered to traditional identity markers like demographic constructs. So people can have multiple identities. You might be a Sikh identifying skateboarder who's also into punk music, right? And you can have those simultaneous identities which traditionally wouldn't necessarily work, but you can hold them and kind of rotate between them. And even a lot of young people have these identities that are rooted in historically conflicting identities. So you could be a punk now, a queer punk that's into rap music, right? And the fluidity around that is amazing. Like, that is not even seen as taboo. They're breaking those classic stereotypes of how one can identify and how one expresses himself. So stop focusing on traditional identity markers, but instead community shared passions and values is where you need to root your campaign focus. This idea of like trusting instincts and hacking the system is something that comes up a lot in our work. There's a skepticism towards traditional institutes, and I think that really affects you guys. That will be one of your biggest barriers. It's like there is just, not that I believe this, but they are questioning any institute or any anything up the kind of power vertical at a rate I've never seen before. So, you know, and this, some key insight that then supports or plays into that mentality is this kind of embracing a DIY mentality of advocating this right to repair, prioritizing sustainability and eco-friendly lifestyle to combat climate change. They rely on themselves. They don't believe institutes are going to make any change, right, wrongly or rightly. They're utilizing platforms like TikTok, Reddit for collective action against corporations and systems that they see as outdated. And I believe, it's my hypothesis, is that charity sector is one of those. So to successfully engage Gen Z, brands must let go of control. Yeah, empower younger people, leverage peer influence, playfully hack outdated systems alongside your target audience. This kind of idea of hyper-pragmatism is another macro trend. Gen Z's revolt against opulence, which again was a result of the kind of wider social inequality and, you know, all the other macroeconomic factors that are affecting their lifestyle, is driving a new era of pragmatism. This isn't everyone. You know, I think there's a huge consumer cohort that still aspire to traditional luxury, but the more progressive Gen Z consumer, who I believe is your strat target, is definitely reshaping society in terms of the ideas of how they connect with brands, platforms, and content. They are reevaluating traditional ideas of luxury, prioritizing comfort, functionality, and sustainability over exclusivity, scarcity, extravagance. Gen Z gravitates towards content that's centered around knowledge, growth, and respite. And then, you know, they really do, you know, focus on environments that trade on this idea of utility that keeps coming up in all of our research reports that we do. So you need to deliver these acts of service, innovate within utility, and embrace clarity and honesty to resonate with this hyper-pragmatic Gen Z consumer. Just conscious of timing. So, experimentation, this open beta mindset that Gen Z fosters. They're embracing this culture of experimentation, living in a kind of a beta mindset, which basically means they're exploring everything. They're experimenting and testing anything in all areas of their life. They have this curiosity and creativity, which is an integral part of how they patch their identity and how they engage with product and brands. Experimentation can be expressed in pretty much every area of their life, whether that's in food, style, fashion. They will experiment and test and pull apart all traditional norms. AI obviously is a huge part of, you know, they've grown up in a context of like smart tech. Like AI is just another tool that they will utilize. I think there is a proportion of this audience that are nervous about it, but there's also a proportion that it's just a new technological shift which they will endorse, they will co-opt and use as part of their life. So brands should encourage customer experimentation. Look at integrate AI into the creative process, which I think, you know, when you haven't got a lot of resource, I think is a really smart way of exploring new creative territories. So the next, I'm just going to quickly go through this, right? But this is what we would talk to when we're, you know, working with the likes of Nike in terms of how your brand positioning needs to be augmented in a way that prepares you for this new generation. And the first thing is that price, function, heritage, emotional benefits is no longer a competitive point to trade off. Charities need to become more than just a donation platform. They need to be able to transcend the non-for-profit category. And I really think that's an important point. It's like you're vying for the attention or against a highly congested like social ecosystem. Right? You can't be looking at your competitors. You need to be looking at who are the brands that hold the most influence over your target consumers. That's who you're kind of going up against. Charities need to be more than a social well-being organization. We need to move to this idea of becoming a cultural icon. Cultural iconic brands provide an opportunity to create meaning within the experience economy. They enable consumers to fit in with an aspirational and influential cultural identity whilst expressing individuality. And that applies to the charities that they engage with, right? We know that there's a proportion of this generation that is really socially minded, but everything they engage with needs to complement their lifestyle and needs to be used as a tool for social signaling. Like, you know, from the drink they get at the corner shop to the pair of trainers that they get, like everything is coded with subtle nuances that they use to build their identity around. And I think that's the same for charities. So I constantly speak to consumer identity desires. So you need to think about how your target audience identifies and how are you speaking to those desires, and look at resolving cultural tensions. So your strategic target wants to be part of a social, like a specific cultural expression or a lifestyle identity, but they also want to be seen to be giving. You know, and that's a tension, right? So how can they essentially fit in, right, and be seen to be cool, but also have a charity that's connected to that lifestyle? And that's something that, you know, I find is a tension that you can be seen to resolving by making sure that you're coding your brand with those lifestyle nuances that they aspire to. And I know that you're thinking, well, we're a charity. This, you know, that's not for us. We're whatever. That's for fashion brands. Every brand they engage with has to hold cultural equity, right? And you know, that's for everything. Otherwise, they will deprioritize you. So charities need to become culture-first brands that specialize in social well-being. So I think like that's your mission, internally and externally. Why? Culture-first brands avoid the battle of benefits. Their cultural positioning lifts them above the category, right? That provides you with differentiation. Quality perception. Culture enhances quality perception. Consumers are willing to invest 40% more on brands that project their lifestyle, right? That hold cultural equity. Premiumness. The aspiration economy is driven through culture. Consumers that perceive organizations that hold cultural relevance they believe their products are superior, and that'd be for your services as well. Like the more charged you are with lifestyle associations and cultural resonance, you know, the more that people will invest. Loyalty. Cultural relevance drives loyalty, advocacy, and business, and builds community. And community is kind of the new 2.0 marketing. It's like, how are you creating community around your product, your services, your organization? Also, media efficiency. Cultural branding provides more efficient media strategies. So at the minute, I'm sure a lot of your campaigns feel like they're interrupting, you're buying attention. If you can be part of cultural conversation, you're more moving to a position where you're entertaining, you're earning attention, and you're cultural storytelling. That's us. It's like it's a lot of intense information, but I feel like, you know, there's a lot of brands that pay a lot of money for this insight. But we want to give it to you for free, and I'm going to send this presentation so that you can have a look at it and enjoy it. Thanks.
Can charities and brands somehow work together to almost gain the cultural equity, if that makes sense? Is there potentially collaborations that you can imagine could exist in the charity and the kind of brand world?
I think a traditional collab strategy is about being able to partner with a brand that can get you into a new space you authentically couldn't speak to, right? So if a brand holds influence over a specific consumer group that you can't get access to, that is the role of a collaboration strategy. And that's really, it's like extending your arms beyond, you know, your natural reach.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that makes sense. So here we go. We've got some questions here, so I haven't been scrolling them, bear with me. One for Matt from Abdul. Matt, can you elaborate more about what not to do when using social media? Any common mistakes people make which possibly can have a negative impact?
Yeah. I think, first of all, overthinking content. A lot of people are reluctant to put content out because of they're anxious to do so, thinking about what their peers might think of them. These shorter platforms now, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, they're all designed because our attention span is focusing on 10 to 15 second pieces of content. So I wouldn't stress over long form content. YouTube is still going to be there for it. Don't worry about having a polished article. These platforms have been made and designed so they don't need to be fluffy. You don't need a production team to do it. You can literally pull out your iPhone and start shooting content and putting out a message that could impact thousands and thousands of people around the world. That's what it's designed for.
That's great, Matt. Thank you. And in the follow-on question here from Sarah, so how do you turn views into action or more active interest in your mission as a charity?
So the best way that we could, I'm just trying to think from this. So the way that we drive action from, so Diabetes UK, for example, they do a cycle from London to Paris every September. And because of social media, they've now, each year they're getting more and more sign-ups, and it's exactly the same with all the other events that they're doing. So sorry if this comes back round, but I think it just comes down essentially to how active you are, the people that you're connecting with, and the message that you're putting out. And just to go back to the point that I made earlier, it doesn't need to be complicated content. You can literally put up a clip, you can overlay the clip with a piece of text, just to grab people's attention, make sure the content is about them. Inherently, we're all quite selfish. So when you read a text saying this can impact your life, you're much more likely to read it. So you've got to think about the people on the other side of the content. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Luke, so I think this is a great question here from Kaylee. So how can charities balance the priorities of young consumers / volunteers against the expectations of older generations? A lot of charities obviously rely on support from older generations, and so how can they kind of blend the two?
Is that Hayley? Where's Hayley? Kaylee. What's happening, Kaylee? Listen, this is the same concern that Adidas, I had a conversation, like we're consulting with Adidas at the minute, and they have exactly the same worries. Like, how do we talk to our, how do we still get sales through our consumption pool, who would be where most of the donations are coming from, while simultaneously speaking to a younger generation? And I think the social ecosystem of social media provides you opportunity to speak directly to a consumer without bastardizing your core consumer group. Like, it's so easy to do, and I think Nike's really good at having layers and layers of communication that speak to different audiences at different times without affecting how each of the different groups perceives the brand. And I think that's really important for you guys to think about, is that simultaneous communication strategy.
Dude, that's great. Most of these are actually just comments about how awesome your presentation was, mate. And can we get the decks and the slides afterwards? And I'm sure you've kindly said you would. Thank you, Luke. So, Luke, one here from Christy. So, Luke, based on your insights, do you have any recommendations on how charities can effectively utilize Gen Z influencers to inspire volunteering? And actually, I think we'll pass that to Matt afterwards as well.
I think, influencers should be seen as an important component of your comms strategy, right? And I think the nature of an influencer is holding influence over their chosen group. It just needs to ensure that it feels authentic, because I think where we find out through a lot of our research is that if it feels like there's a misalignment between the influencer and the cause, people are actually turned off, right? But you have a really an honest and an earnest industry that I think could incorporate a lot of influences within your mix, right? So many people are going to want to support, and I think it's about just endorsing. It's about co-opting your kind of purpose, and then using that to then subseed out across their network. So it's almost like you have a under the radar strategy, which is where you use influencers to kind of bomb little micro communities with your messaging. And I think it's really important that let them take it into their own world, right? It's like this open source mentality of just letting people take your brand, your organization, and then kind of let them make sense of it and communicate in however they want to, in whichever way they seem fit.
And passing it over to Matt. Matt, you obviously, in terms of that authenticity, couldn't be more authentic in the way that you deal with diabetes, right?
Yeah, I think, he's hit the nail on the head there. I think authenticity is key, and to move back to brands, a lot of brands that we've worked with now are actually starting to work with micro-influencers as opposed to these macro-influencers with 2 million followers. So what they're doing is they're finding people that have a niche and they have a really engaged community. So if you are going out there looking for influencers, I'd really do your due diligence, take your time, look through, is this going to benefit us? But most of the time you'll be reached out to by micro-influencers as well. Like the team at Diabetes UK probably have enough of me. They're sick and tired of hearing from me. But it's just because it's such a passion and I love doing it. But I think, apps now like TikTok, just what Luke was talking about previously, the reason why these apps have been created is because of people want to see rawness. It's the kind of the zeitgeist at the moment is that people don't want to see these premium quality films. They want to see rawness. They want to see just what's real. So if you as a charity just start putting out content, what's real, messaging, interactions that you've had with people across your social media channels, even if you've had a back and forth with somebody on direct messages, you can screenshot that, put some music behind it, bang, that's a 10-second reel already about how you've potentially changed somebody's life.
And can you just actually expand, because on you had a section where we talked about sort of, the ambassadors. So obviously with diabetes, you have type 1 diabetes, it's a very obvious sort of connection. Where perhaps that there isn't such an obvious connection maybe, how might you suggest some of the organisations in the room go about identifying who might be good ambassadors for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I think you should start doing polls. Any content that you're putting out there, just say in the question, look, please tag somebody below who might be interested in this, and you'll be surprised how quickly a tag gets around and you'll start finding the right people. So put a poll up across your Instagram. We're looking for this kind of ambassador. Does anybody know anybody who fits into this mold, into this bracket? If so, please tag them in the comments below. And most of the time you're going to get a response pretty quickly.
That's great, Matt. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through these questions. So I've got one here for both of you, actually. So from Karina, Luke and Matt, do you think every charity should be using all major social media platforms to reach each different demographic, or how do they choose the right ones for them?
Who asked that question? Karina, hey mate. Yeah, I think you need to see every single media platform as a different stream of traffic. Therefore, you need to have some visibility across each of those different platforms. However, certain platforms over-index with certain consumer groups, right? TikTok naturally leans to a younger consumer. Facebook naturally leans to an older consumer. YouTube naturally leans to a more content-engaged consumer. So there are these insights that then should prioritize how you invest against those platforms, against each of your different consumer groups.
Yeah, I would personally say absolutely. Get the content out there. Think about the audience that you're speaking to. If you're putting a video out on LinkedIn, you're going to speak differently to them as you would, differently than you would on TikTok or Snapchat. Essentially, you can use the same piece of content across 7 or 8 different platforms, which I know can feel slightly overwhelming, but ChatGPT and all that. So.
I wondered when ChatGPT was going to get fired in here. Cool. So one from Laura here, and I think the crux of the question I can see, it looks to be, could you give some more examples, Luke, around that? You mentioned community on one of the slides and building a community, keeping them engaged. Can you give us some examples, maybe that you've seen in the brand space, of how they've done that well, and maybe there could be some parallels? If this is still working, yeah.
Thanks for the question. Like every brand ultimately has some kind of, whether it's a shallow or a deep level of consumer groups that's placed as part of a community, right? And we recently created a community around North Face and we've created several communities, but I'll talk around one specifically that was centered around people that are into streetwear, right? The person that's into streetwear wants to engage with like minds, and all we are doing as a brand is facilitating that engagement on and offline. Online, it's across like Discord channels or other gated communities where people can talk around their shared passion, people that are into the similar touch points around lifestyle that they're into, and then also facilitate people coming together in real life, again, which is something that a lot of people like genuinely crave, and I think there's less of than ever before. So it's just about facilitating people coming together around a shared passion point, right? And you know that the passion point would have to center around your brand DNA, which obviously is around giving, and around a specific cause. So it's just allowing people to, you know, that being a sort of tent pole that everyone congregates around. Can I just ask one quick question? Can I just see a raise of hands of people that have used ChatGPT? Damn. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that is insightful. And actually, by the way, I'd be wrong not to just plug Volunteero once, okay? If, you know, we're looking for ways to create that community digitally, I think you've all seen how that works on the app today, all right? So, you know, just saying. Okay, so look, I think we've probably got time for maybe one or two more questions. I've got one here from Eliza. So, how do we motivate Gen Z to engage in our work off social media? How can we make sure the activism we inspire isn't viewed as performative? When working with ambassadors, how can we find out which ones will have the best target audience for our organization? So there's a few questions there. So let's start with the first one. How do we motivate Gen Z to engage to work off social media?
So I think young people naturally want to participate in something that can help project like how they signal social care. All you have to do is provide the tools that enable that, right? And it's just about really simple mechanics that allow for social sharing is how I believe that you're going to get the most visibility across young people's social channels. The second part of the question was?
How can we make sure that the activism we inspire isn't viewed as performative?
I think there's always a performative, like human nature is around signaling when you're doing anything around like a social cause. Like people are driven by a kind of a need to perform and then a genuine desire to do better. And I think they work hand in hand. I think the motivations are often quite clouded. You know, really what's important is the action. And I think young people generally are conflicted. You know, there's a lot of internal tensions there, which means that there's often, you know, a multitude of drivers behind any decision. Some are like more egoic and some are more genuine. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's more about how you're just going to get maximum visibility across young people. How do you harness and leverage their motivation for good is the question. And then the third part?
Third part, I think maybe is for both of you guys, but Matt, if we start with you. So how can we find out talking about ambassadors and influencers here, how can we find out which ones will have the best target audience for our organization? Great question.
I wouldn't worry so much about, this might sound contradictory, but about yourself first of all. I would just do the work of reaching out to people. And, you know, as Luke said, naturally we want to show and share most of our life. If you're running a 10K, there's a good chance that you're going to put it on social media, because if you haven't done that, then you haven't done the 10K, right? So just take your time. And people love, in terms of other ambassadors that I know for Diabetes UK, they love what the charity does so much that it should shine through. It should be enough. I wouldn't worry so much about somebody putting out a message that's going to affect the brand, affect the charity, because generally speaking, 99% of the work that I see creators do for charities has always done really, really well. Yeah.
There are actually some platforms, I can't think of them off the top of my head unless you know any, Matt, that maybe have some free elements to them where you can actually put in sort of search criteria, even audience criteria, and you'll get a list of kind of influencers at certain ranges and stuff. So there are tools out there that exist.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that now, a lot of the younger generations, the Gen Zs, they're actually using Instagram and TikTok more so as a search engine. Like say you want to go to a restaurant that you've been to, a lot of these generations of people now, they're going to Instagram and TikTok first before they go to Google. So it could be a good way if you're trying to find ambassadors as well. Look through the hashtags, look through that. It could be a better route of doing it.
Fantastic. Let me just see if there is one more question or not. I don't know if I've asked them all, but I think I may well have done. And to be honest, we're maybe a minute or two away from lunch. So I think we will call that session a day there. So if everyone could just put their hands together and thank these guys for coming.